Snakes have been the go-to reptile for pet keepers for decades. And on today's episode, I want to talk to you about something a little bit more advanced than, say, a ball python. Today's video is the 5 coolest intermediate level snakes. I'm Adam, you're watching Wiccan's Wicked Reptiles. Stick around. Snakes in a nutshell are limbless, eyelidless, external earless noodles, basically. They're long tubes with a skeleton and a bunch of muscle and some organs in them. They're very cool. They feel very interesting when they crawl around on you, and I think that's what makes them so popular, because not only are they cool, and not everybody has one, but they come in a million different varieties, species, colors. It's really interesting to have a snake, and today we're going to talk about the 5 coolest ones that are more of an intermediate level, not only because of care, but some of them are kind of hard to find. So let's start off with number 5. Number 5 is one that I've got in my collection. It is the boa constrictor. And we're going to talk about BCIs, BCCs. We're not just going to, narrow it down. Basically, if you want a boa constrictor, your snake's going to get likely between 6 and 10 feet. So it's going to be a rather large animal in comparison to, say, Pikachu here, who is only about 5 feet. This is a full-grown ball python. He is very placid, as you can tell. Pikachu here is only going to get to about 6 feet, maybe if he's lucky. Right now he's about 4.5 feet. He's a full-grown ball python, where I've already got an animal that's only 2 years old. She's not nearly full-grown yet. This is Franny, and she is, well, she's a BCI. She's a boa constrictor and predator. I always pronounce it wrong, but you can read it. And she's going to get possibly up to about 10 feet. I think it's more likely she'll get to 7 or 8, just because I feed her kind of conservatively. I only feed her every 3 weeks now that she's about 6 feet. She's a little bit bigger now than in the video that I'm showing you right here. But I do appreciate having an animal that's a little bit larger. The thing is, though, because she wasn't super socialized when I got her, she's not as trustworthy as, say, Pikachu, who I don't really have to pay too much attention to. And even if he does grab a hold of me, which I'm really hoping he doesn't, it's not going to leave the same type of damage that an 8-foot boa constrictor might leave on you. The main difference between a ball python and a boa constrictor, which seem to be pretty common in terms of constricting type snakes, snakes that are bigger and constrict their prey, is that if you look at Pikachu's face, which he's pulling away now, he's got pits on his face, and that's how he seeks his food, basically. That's their heat-seeking pits. They seek heat, and they eat mammals, right, which are warm-blooded. Where with boa constrictors, they don't have that. In my opinion, boa constrictors have a much more aggressive feeding response than ball pythons do. And ball pythons from the old world, they lay eggs. Boa constrictors from the new world, they do not. They give live birth, and they get bigger. They're also a lot stronger, in my opinion, as well. And I think it's a great option if you are just getting into something that's a little bit more intermediate, because they do hold on to you. They are a little bit bigger, but they're not going to crush you, and they are quite different than, say, your average ball python. And just to round it off with the boa constrictors, they do come in several patterns. The South American snake does come in quite a few morphs nowadays, where they're a little bit newer, so they are a little bit more expensive. Albino boas in my area anyway are a lot more expensive than something like Pikachu, which is a albino ball python. So number 5, boa constrictors. Number 4, as I'm handcuffed here by the ball python, are black-tailed cribos, and these are a large colubrid species. They made the list because they're so cool and they are becoming more popular, but they are kind of hard to find sometimes, and they do have a temperament that isn't really for beginners, in my opinion. And if they do take a chunk out of you, they're a big snake. These guys can get around 9 feet sometimes. They're pretty big in terms of colubrids. You'll never see a 9-foot corn snake, for example. And they get pretty big around, but they are slender. They're not going to get as big as, say, something like a python, but they're going to get bigger around than your average colubrid, like a hognose snake or a corn snake or something like that. So although I said 9 feet, average 6 to 8, I know of one that was 9 feet. They're big colubrids. They're very fast, and they can kind of double back on themselves like a lapids do, which is really interesting. Lapids being like cobras and things like that. So these guys can kind of get you, where with a ball python, if you're tailing, like if it's a ball python that's being kind of aggressive, not aggressive but defensive at you, you can kind of predict which way it's going to strike. But with black-tailed cribos, they can go backwards and side to side, and they're kind of unpredictable in that way. But also, they do have a feeding response that sometimes they don't really realize that it's not time to feed, which is another reason that you might get bit by these guys. However, if you don't have problems like this, they're big, they're beautiful, they'll hold on to you, they feel a little bit like a python, not quite as strong, but they're definitely very different than your average corn snake. Another reason that they're on this list rather than a beginner list is they're hard to keep, well, not hard to keep, but harder to keep than other colubrids, and they need a high humidity, 70% on average. I don't have personal experience, so if I'm wrong on this, correct me in the comments section, but from the research that I've done, that's where you want to be, right around 70%. The temperature is a little bit more moderate, so that's pretty easy, but they're going to need a bigger enclosure because, of course, well, they're, up to an 8-foot snake. And the last thing about these guys, they are hard to find, and if you can find one, they aren't cheap. They are kind of expensive. The only place I've ever seen one is a reptile expo. You're not likely to see these at pet stores or even reptile shops a lot of the time, although we do have one at the reptile shop down the street from me. Number 3, Mandarin rat snakes. And if you want to know why I picked a Mandarin rat snake, it's simple. Look at them. These are maybe the most beautiful non-venomous snake in my opinion. They are gorgeous, they are very fun to look at, their even temperament makes them really good pets, but they're hard to find, and even if you can find them, a lot of the times they are brought in from overseas, they are wild caught, and they do not do well when they get here. And that's why they're on this list. And because there's not a lot known about them, a lot of people will say that there's not really great care sheets out there, and not a lot of people really know how to handle them and how to care for them correctly. And that's why I would consider them more of an intermediate than a beginner type of snake. So if you want to look at them, well, that's great, go to a zoo. But if you really want to take care of something that you're going to have to do a little bit of learning and not all the information is out there completely, this might be the snake for you. The other thing too is you want to make sure that their temperatures are rather cool. If they get too hot, you're going to be in trouble. And their humidity needs to be moderate as well, but not as low as a lot of other snakes that have a lower type temperature. Another thing with Mandarin rat snakes too is they like to burrow quite a bit, so you're not going to see them a ton, and which is a shame because of how beautiful they are, and you want to have a deep substrate for them to burrow in that isn't going to collapse, because from what I understand, the limited amount that's available in terms of knowledge on these guys is they're a little bit fragile, and kind of like a Colombian rainbow boa, or any type of rainbow boa, which I've left off the list. If the humidity isn't right, they may perish within a few days, where a lot of snakes can usually keep up with sub-proper conditions for a little bit longer than a Mandarin rat snake. Alright, so let's move on to another python species. Number 2, Woma pythons. Now, I think these, in terms of pythons, naturally occurring that aren't a morph or something that has been genetically modified, not genetically modified, but selectively bred to look different, like Pikachu, for example, these guys are really interesting to look at, very beautiful, but they're also unpredictable in my experience. And by my experience, I mean the only few times I've ever held one, they seemed fine, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they think you're food. They have an unbelievable feeding response. But if you can tame them down and you can kind of train them to know when it's time to eat, when it's time not to eat, these are really kind of smaller type of pythons, right? They're only going to get 4-ish to 5, maybe 6 feet, but they're not going to get bigger than that. So similar size to a ball python, which is with a really cool natural coloration and pattern, which is kind of banded like that. And I think a lot of Australian snakes have, or Australian pythons, have this very unique type of coloration and patterning that a lot of, older world snakes or even new world snakes don't. But if you can get past the unpredictability, as I call it, these guys are really easy to keep. They're not super high or super low temperatures, very common in terms of lots of other snakes fit in these parameters, and they're easy to keep, and same with humidity as well. So if you want something that's easy to keep and you have a little bit of time to make sure that you know how to tame it properly, and you want something that's going to eat every time, Woma pythons might be for you, and they're beautiful too. Alright, let's get to it. Number 1. The number 1 intermediate snake, in my opinion, bull snakes. Now, a lot of people are going to say this is actually, more of a beginner type species. And the reason I don't think so is because they do get quite big, they're very fast, they're very darty, and also can be unpredictable from my experience and my research. In terms of colubrids, these guys get pretty big, up to 8 feet, and they are a North American species, so they're not super hard to find. Check in your area if you've got bylaws against keeping them. I know in my area we don't, but say some garter snakes, for example, we can't keep because they're native. So if you're, especially you're from like the West, because these guys are the Dakota area, that's where you're gonna find them. Other areas too as well. Just check to make sure you can have one. But an 8-foot colubrid that gets as big as your forearm, and I mean a real man's forearm, not my dainty little forearms, that's pretty cool in my opinion. They're going to be able to eat medium-sized rats. Some people feed them even large rats, and they do get to the size of, say, a Pikachu who's trying to get away on my chair. Just give me a sec. So if you want something that's super big in terms of a colubrid and kind of keeps it a lower temperature than a ball python or a lot of python species, a bull snake might be for you. Oh yeah, and if you're into breeding snakes or you want to breed snakes and you want to really do your research, of course, which you should do first, but you want something that yields quite a few eggs and isn't super difficult, bull snakes are a great option. They are pretty simple to breed in my opinion, and the research that I've done talking to people who do breed them, which actually is quite a few. I was surprised how many people breed bull snakes, but again, they do have that notorious temper problem. Of course, if you socialize them from babies, not really a problem. I think you've seen that the theme of this is that they're not as placid out of the box, as I like to say, as, say, a ball python, which I've been manipulating the entire time and he hasn't hissed at me once. I don't know if you could do that with a bull snake, unless, of course, it's something you've socialized from a very young age. So there you go. That is the 5 best or coolest intermediate level snakes, in my opinion. What do you think? Did I exclude something? Did I forget something? Should I put something in there that I didn't? I'd love to hear from you. And of course, I took this video to the comments section, so put down there what I should do next week. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button already, I'd really appreciate that. And because I do videos twice a week, that means that I'll see you on Thursday.